Thank you so much for joining us this morning for Multicultural Supports for Older Adults webinar. My name is Barbara McMillan and I'm Provincial Community Engagement Coordinator for the United Way of the Lower Mainland's Population Health Team. I'd like to begin by recognizing that we are speaking here today from the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And as this is a provincial webinar, with participants from all over British Columbia, we also acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of all First Nations of BC, on which we gratefully work and gather. So just before we get started, a few technical details. As of yesterday, we had 134 people registered for this webinar, and we're really thrilled at the interest in this really important topic. So to manage the session and to ensure good audio and visual quality, there's a few details that we need to point out. First, everyone will be muted and cameras will be off. You'll be prompted to respond to some questions during the presentation, so please look out for polls throughout the webinar, and you'll be given a few seconds to respond. And then at the end, we'll actually have a 10-minute question period. So you can use the Q&A feature to ask questions at any time throughout the presentation. And if you want to direct your question to a particular presenter, please mention that when you pose your question. The webinar is being recorded and it'll be posted on Healthy Aging Core along with the slides in the next day or two. And you can find it by doing a search for the title or just type in the word webinar and all of our Healthy Aging Core webinars will show up. Following this morning's webinar, you'll receive an automatic email from Zoom with a link to a very brief survey about the webinar. We'd really appreciate it if you would take a few minutes to complete the survey because we want to get everybody's reaction and keep improving our regular program of webinars on Core. So to get started, let's talk about the goals of the webinar for a minute. As you can see, it's to provide an update on the activities of the provincial working group that's focused on interfaith, intercultural activities, and to introduce Healthy Aging Core's new group area designed to share culturally relevant resources aimed at supporting the healthy aging of culturally, linguistically, and ethnically diverse older adults. We'll also introduce a brand new Intercultural Toolkit that provides a step-by-step approach to help community organizations enhance their level of cultural competency and relevancy, or for their individual programs. And finally, we'll share some insights on how the toolkit can be used in a community organization setting. So for presenters today, besides myself, I'd like to now introduce we have three, Daisy, Michael, and Keiko, who will individually introduce, but first presenting will be Daisy, and she is coordinator of the Seniors Club and of specialized and innovative programs at Mosaic, and Daisy is also the co-lead of the Provincial Intercultural Interfaith Working Group. So over to you, Daisy. Let me introduce Daisy first more completely. Besides those two roles, Daisy's got over 17 years of experience working in the immigrant settlement sector. As mentioned, she's coordinator of Mosaic Seniors Club, where she provides social connection activities, community events, and volunteer opportunities for immigrant seniors. And she's committed to empower immigrant seniors to be leaders and mentors and to raise awareness of elder abuse and neglect through her coordinator role in the Chinese Community Response Network. She aims to be the voice for immigrant seniors in the underserved immigrant seniors population, helping to break social isolation. And she's passionate about supporting immigrants as they integrate into Canadian society and become contributing citizens. Daisy's also a board member of the Metro Vancouver Cross-Cultural Seniors Network Society, and her immigration stories featured in the Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21. I should also mention that Daisy is a member of the CBSS Leadership Council with us here at United Way. So now over to you, Daisy.
Thank you, Bob. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to give you an overview of the Intercultural Working Group. We use Intercultural Working Group because the faith is more personal and it included in the intercultural area. So the Intercultural Working Group is one of the 6 provincial working groups under the Committee-Based Senior Services Leadership Council, and emerged from the Raising the Profile project, which was created to demonstrate the value and raise the profile of the sector, and outlines its contribution to healthy aging and explore the potential of the sector to do much more. The Leadership Council is supported by United Way of the Lower Mainland to advance key sector and capacity development priorities. The working group was created. The membership of the working group reflects the diversity of the interfaith and intercultural communities. The Intercultural Working Groups explore and recommends innovative and inclusive approaches to support older adults from diverse communities, culture, and faith groups, including Indigenous elders. The working group advocates for approaches to better include older adults of varied cultures and faiths into community-based programming. And we also look for new initiatives to promote learning and sharing and encourage older adults to better understand one another. In terms of activities, the working group developed a calendar of cultural events, and through CORE, we built a library of resources that promote intercultural engagement. In the past year, the graduate students from the working group conducted a literature review on how to improve the capacity of intercultural senior programs in BC. It revealed the need to address the well-being of all seniors in the context of multiculturalism and super diversity. Language barrier and cultural diversity create communication challenges as well as stereotyping. Developing cultural competency promote deeper understanding and social connectivity in the super diverse communities. From the regional consultation across BC, we heard that there is a need for sustainable funding for intercultural programming. Cultural programs are more than just about culture. They also provide social and other opportunities. Many and varied intercultural and monocultural programs exist throughout BC. There's need to be more collaboration among program and service providers, need for toolkit, resources, and use of CORE as a platform for discussion, sharing ideas, and best practices. At the Provincial Healthy Aging Summit in November, the working group is in transition to an open discussion group on CORE. The new format accommodates a wider and more diverse membership. It will focus on relationship building, promote learning and sharing, develop a community of practice and engagement strategy for ethnically diverse community, and building capacity of individuals and organizations to promote and provide multicultural support of older adults. The presentation of the Intercultural Working Group can be found on CORE, and you will learn more from our other presenter about this new open group. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Daisy. We're going to look now at, and I should be sharing my screen. We're going to look at CORE. Hopefully, you've all heard it mentioned a number of times. Hopefully, you are already members of CORE. If not, then I would encourage you to join. If you go to healthyagingcore.ca, on the homepage, you will see up over here, join in red. You just join and mention, note your name, email address, create a password, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then you will receive a link to confirm you're joining CORE. CORE is aimed at the CBSS sector, not individual seniors who are looking for information about programs and resources, but for people, volunteers and staff, academics, researchers, health authority representatives, other government reps, people who share our vision of supporting older adults to remain as healthy as possible in their homes and in their communities. So it's a resource, it's a knowledge hub, and it has a lot of features designed to support the CBSS sector in communicating, sharing information, coordinating, and collaborating as well. And we try to keep it really up to date. Everything that goes onto CORE is vetted to ensure that it is relevant to the sector, that it is as current as possible, and that it comes from reputable sources. So it's like a one-stop shop for healthy aging. So you'll see that it's got a lot of different features. We have information about relevant training topics, about resources, and different groups, which I'll come back to in a minute. And we also have funding information over here. We have featured community programs, so we profile programs that we know are really effective in communities across different subsectors like seniors housing, nutritional supports, addressing isolation, rural and remote community activities, and interfaith, intercultural, of course, and seniors community action or planning tables. There's a variety of toolkits on CORE. There's all kinds of allied and partner organizations that you can learn about here and go directly to their sites or to their resources. Some that you may not already know about, but that do have programs and information and other materials that are relevant to people working and volunteering in the CBSS sector. So the site is full of a lot of different things, and we don't have time to go over all of it today, but I would really encourage you to explore it. There's a lot of resources, as I mentioned, close to 900, I think now at this point, and again, all screened and vetted. One thing I should mention as well, if you're not already receiving the newsletter, you can sign up for it right here. And the newsletter goes out twice a month, our regular newsletter, and then on opposite weeks, a special COVID edition, because there's so much new information and resources available on that topic. So the material on CORE is changing regularly. There's always some new featured events focused. I mentioned the featured programs, new ones being added all of the time. Here's today's webinar, and the resources that we'll go to, which are again being added to all the time. And just yesterday, the Intercultural Toolkit was added to the group for multicultural supports for older adults. I'm just going to go back to the group for a moment to show you where you can find and join groups. Now, the important thing to know here is that anybody can look at CORE and see all of the resources and what's on the home page and training and funding information, etc. But to participate in any groups, you actually have to join CORE. And so that's where you go up to that red join icon in the top right-hand corner and join, so that you can then get to the group area, and you'll find that there are some groups that have a lock on them. They're closed. Those groups are only available to members of that group. For example, the Better at Home group here, you must be a Better at Home coordinator or staff person with the Better at Home program to be part of that group. This is another new group that is very focused with a number of people who are doing some work around the opportunity to reimagine seniors care in the current situation. Funding information opportunities is open to anyone, seniors transportation. So you'll see if there's a lock on it, those are groups that you have to be invited to join because you would be a member of that particular group. So this is the new group that Daisy mentioned, the Multicultural Supports for our Older Adults group. It's an open group, so we'll go to it, and that's where you will find the new toolkit. You can also get it from the resources section, which we'll come back to a bit later, but the toolkit and a lot of other material is here. When you first go into the group, you'll see the latest activity. here. So everything just comes up pretty much chronologically. So this was added just yesterday, and then the slides Daisy referred to were added several days ago, and then there's some discussion threads. So it's chronological, but then if you want to go into the actual discussions and the resources, you just click on the menu bar here. But I'm going to turn it over to Mike now, because he has done a lot of work in this group area. And with the toolkit, as I mentioned, that he developed, and the working group provided a lot of input and framing and feedback on. So Mike is our Community Engagement Program Assistant with Population Health here at United Way. But he first joined us a few months ago as a practicum student while in his final semester of the Master of Public Health program with a health promotion concentration at the University of Alberta. Mike's also a registered nurse, and his experience as a primary healthcare worker has provided him with valuable perspectives on the healthcare system and the impact of poor health outcomes in the clinical setting. He has a particular interest in immigrant health and has been supporting the work of this intercultural working group as part of his practicum, and now also in his program assistant roles. As mentioned, a significant part of his work has been developing this toolkit that he's going to introduce today. So over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Barb. Hi, everybody. Now I'm going to share my screen, and I'll just give you a little overview of the new multicultural group, which is on CORE. So there we go. Okay, yeah, so as Barb mentioned, you can go into the group section, which is also here at the top, and come to the multicultural supports. So this basically, we made this group about 3 months ago, and sort of since the time I've been at the United Way, I've been uploading any resources that I've come across in my research that would be relevant to CVSS organizations as it relates to cultural competency or working with culturally diverse groups. So as Barb mentioned, there's the home, which shows recent activity. There's the discussions, which she just showed. This resource section is probably the area that has the most content. And like I said, there's a lot of resources added here. There's programs and organizations, but there's also individual documents, individual toolkits. So really, yeah, anything that you're looking for that might be relevant to culturally diverse seniors, there's definitely probably something here that you would find that would be beneficial to your organization. The area that is sort of new and we're trying to develop a little bit is the discussion area. So we really want to get people that are working in the sector to come on here and have discussions. As you see, a lot of these were made by me. But other organizations that want to start a discussion about a particular topic, they can absolutely do so by adding a discussion topic here. And then the point would be that other people, other organizations could comment and sort of contribute to a community of practice and actually have some discussions about the topics that are kind of most relevant right now in the sector. So I think if you haven't joined up for CORE, hopefully you will do so after this, and you can check out this group and kind of look through it as you please. And if there's any feedback that you think something needs to be added or changed, you can definitely reach out to us and we'll do that. So so the most recent resource added was this toolkit and checklist, as Barb mentioned. So that's actually what I'm going to talk about now. So we'll go back to the PowerPoint here. There we go. So actually, you know what, before we do this, we're going to do a poll. We're going to ask 3 questions of all the participants, just to find out a little bit of information about what your existing knowledge of cultural competency is, or your existing, if you've done a cultural competency assessment. We're going to ask 3 questions, and we'll just take a little bit of time for you to answer those, and we'll see what the results are. So I believe everybody can see the results. So we have 76% that say that their organization does have a purpose or a mission statement with goals and values, policies and procedures that are for enhancing cultural competency. And I see that there's 24% that do not. So as I get into the toolkit a little bit more, you'll see that is one of the important steps of cultural competency. But we'll see what we'll ask the next question, and we'll see. Yeah. And I believe the end of this question is of your program or your organization. So for this question, yeah, we have 45 who said they have previously assessed their existing level and 55% who said they haven't. So I guess a little bit more who some may have had the actual mission statement and values in place, but maybe haven't taken the next step for that assessment piece. So yeah, we'll go on to the third question and just see what you guys have to say. Okay, so this one is 93% that have, oh, I guess this one is a little bit confusing because it's hard to tell if the yes is for have you taken it or do you need it. I'm going to assume maybe that there's quite a few that would say that they do need the cultural competency training, but we can discuss that a little bit more in the Q&A at the end of the webinar. So, okay, so I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint here. So for about the next 15 minutes, I'm going to give an introduction to the Intercultural Toolkit. I'll go over why we developed it, how it was developed, and then give a brief overview of the main steps. So as for why, Daisy actually highlighted quite a bit of the why component based on what we learned from the regional consultations. There's an apparent need for programming for culturally diverse seniors and for culturally competent services within the sector. Some reasons that I came across was that when I was doing research, it did seem that there was some scattered research on cultural competency, but not really the whole process, which is all in one place, which the purpose of this toolkit is to bring all the steps and put them into one place that CVSS organizations can go to use within their work. And the last reason is that BC is very culturally diverse, particularly within its seniors population. And this really highlights the need for such services. So I've included some statistics here. I don't need to go over all of them, but as you can see, the population of British Columbia is quite culturally diverse. I haven't included here, but is relevant to this conversation, is the number of LGBTQ seniors and the number of seniors of different religions. I don't have the numbers here, but in the toolkit, you'll see that there's even more statistics on these culturally diverse groups within BC. So that was sort of the why, and then sort of the how. The purpose, the process of developing the toolkit. It came from to provide a step-by-step approach or a how-to guide designed specifically for CBSS organizations to enhance the cultural competency of their programs or their organizations. Another term which, besides cultural competency, which is used, is relevancy. And within the toolkit, we use the word competency, but it also refers to relevancy. So how to make programming relevant to culturally diverse seniors within your organization or your community. The toolkit is a two-piece. There's two parts to the toolkit. So there's the larger toolkit document, which is about 30 pages. And then there's the more condensed checklist. Both of these are on that resource which we shared on Core. So there's the larger, and then there's the smaller version. And this sort of allows for organizations which might, not have time to read a full 30-page document to have the quicker version, which they can sort of take what they need from it quickly. And I'll also highlight that when I say culturally diverse groups, it refers to interfaith groups and also Indigenous groups. Particularly in the larger document, there's quite a bit of information on Indigenous groups and sort of engagement processes and research about working with Indigenous groups. So the checklist, not so much, because it's more of a condensed, simpler version, but the larger document definitely has that information. And I'll also say that the toolkit was developed by me through academic and gray literature research. I did use rigorous research methods, and it's based on current evidence. But that's that I don't personally have significant experience working in a community organization for culturally diverse seniors. So there's definitely many of you that have firsthand experience working with this group. And like I said, or as Barb discussed, the Intercultural Working Group, which also has Daisy and Keiko, it's made up of people that have this experience, and they've reviewed the toolkit and the checklist and provided feedback. So it should have it definitely has some contextual purpose. Yeah. So. So I'll get into the actual steps. So the toolkit is divided into two phases. There's phase one, which I deemed as reflecting and assessing, which has the two steps there below. And then there's the phase two part, which is more of the planning and implementation. And I did this because it might be a little bit overwhelming for an organization to take on the whole process all at once. Organizations may want to commit to one block at a time, or they maybe have already done potentially phase one, and they're really just looking for information on phase two. So because of this, it's organized in this way so that you can really take from it what you need, because we wanted it to be useful to the CBSS sector, to the organizations that work in the community. So yeah, getting into those steps, the first one, which was sort of one of the polling questions, was to develop a purpose and a mission statement, which has goals, values, visions, and policies and procedures. They might not actually particularly use the word cultural competency, but most organizations might use the word inclusion and diversity. Most organizations likely have some sort of a mission statement. However, it might not include this inclusion and diversity piece. And if it does not, we would suggest to add it based on what was found in the research. And it's also important to ensure that organizational policies and procedures are representative of the goals and the visions. So what's stated in the mission statements are actually reflected in the policies and procedures. I've included an example here of what the mission statement of the United Way of Lower Mainland is as it pertains to diversity and inclusion. As you can see, there's you can see that there's values, principles, and goals which are sort of integrated into the statement. So yeah. The second part of the assessment phase, so phase one, is to do a cultural assessment or an audit. So these are the steps here, which I've listed. I give more detail, obviously, in the toolkit, but I'll just give a brief overview of what I mean by each. So the first step is to identify the cultural groups within your organization. So this includes groups of different faiths, ethnicities, languages, sexual orientation, as well as Indigenous groups. The second step is self-reflection. So this is actually the basis of cultural competency. It can happen individually and as an organization. It allows us to identify and confront biases, beliefs, stereotypes, or any misinformation that we might have regarding the different groups within our community. And it also allows us to consider how these potential biases might affect the way we communicate or we work with these groups. The third step is to acknowledge current relationships between different groups. So this is looking at existing alliances or current or even historical conflicts which exist between the groups. And an important part of that would be to look at reconciliation and relationships with the Indigenous community. Really review what that means for your organization. The fourth step is to assess your existing level of cultural competency. So this is also one of the polling questions which we asked, and I believe, I don't remember the number, but there was quite a few of you that said you did assess your existing level, which is a very important step. So from the research, I gathered that there was actually 4 steps of cultural competency. So there was cultural knowledge, cultural awareness, cultural sensitivity, and then finally competency was when you were able to merge those steps together and then put it into action. And if potentially your organization thinks that they are not as culturally competent as they'd like to be, there's a lot of training opportunities within BC for cultural competency for individuals, but also at the organizational level. That was another polling question, but like I said, it was a little bit, maybe some of you said you have taken it or that you think you need it. So maybe we'll discuss that in the Q&A. And the final step is to do some research. So it's recommended to do some research of the demographic makeup of your community. This can be done through Stats Canada or other resources. It's a step that's done before engaging with the actual people in those groups. So it's important to look at the makeup of the community, but it's also important to research the different cultural factors of those groups. And there's a few resources. There's one from the Government of Canada, which I posted in the toolkit, which actually gives some information on different cultures and different groups from different countries. With that being said, of course, cultural groups are, of course, not homogenous, and there's diversity within the diversity. So learning about those generalized cultural factors isn't the only part of the process, but it can be helpful when moving forward to do more engagement pieces. So I mean, in the toolkit, I included some examples about Syrian culture and groups, and Japanese culture and Japanese groups, but those were just examples to include. And obviously, no matter, depending on the community in which you're in, you would look at maybe other groups and what are some common cultural factors. So yeah. So this is part of phase 2, moving on to the planning and implementation part. Once an organization is ready to move on to the planning phase, there are a couple key considerations. So I've listed the 4 main steps there. So engaging with community members from diverse groups is a key part. So this could be community champions or other types of leaders, or just well-informed and involved members of those groups in the community. The purpose is to ask these groups about their needs and the desires of the community, ask for their feedback about any proposed ideas that you may have, and then actually use that feedback for any programming that you're thinking of doing. And an important part of engagement is building trust. So as I mentioned, I included quite a bit on Indigenous engagement in the toolkit, but this is quite an important piece for any ethnically or culturally diverse group of seniors, or any type of group. So the second step is to engage with other organizations in the community. So this includes other CBSS organizations, immigrant and refugee serving organizations like Mosaic, Indigenous cultural centers, such as the Friendship Centers, which there's many across BC. Public libraries was another organization which came up as a valuable organization to do engagement with, or to work with when it comes to working with newcomers, because the libraries are a place that is known for newcomers to visit frequently and have relationships with. And in the toolkit, I've listed a whole bunch of other organizations which any organization here could consider looking into and developing a partnership with. So, and finally, or not finally, so the third is to identify existing strengths and assets. So this is looking at what the different groups, cultural groups within your community bring to the table. It could be strengths that are present within existing relationships or certain settings. So for example, in rural communities, they typically may have community solidarity or close-knit relationships due to the fact that they're smaller communities. And this could be a strength that can definitely be utilized. And faith groups is another setting which could be very valuable, as they're embedded in local communities and they have access to a wide range of people. And skills and strengths could also be more activity type things like art, music, food, or things like that. And then finally, this as part of the planning phase, an important step is to increase the cultural diversity of the staff and volunteers which work in the organization. And this was mentioned many places in the research, and it's because diverse workplaces are shown to be actually more productive and effective. And having bicultural and bilingual workers, this often plays a role in developing trust and creating cultural alignment with immigrant and refugee seniors. And it also increases the participation of culturally diverse seniors in programs. And another important piece is to have this representation of diversity in positions of leadership. So there should be diversity on boards and as executives and on the management team as well. So then the final part of phase 2 is the implementation phase. When we're ready for the implementation phase, there's a couple important cultural factors to consider. And then I've included also a couple of tips for inclusivity. So I have some of the cultural factors listed here. Again, this is just obviously the simplified version, and the toolkit goes into much more detail. So I'll just say, for example, with gender, every community is obviously going to be different, and the groups which make up their community, they would have to look at what are the cultural factors which are important to those groups or which could potentially create differences. One common one would be gender. So there are a couple, depending on what your organization does or what the programming is, potentially same gender service providers or gender segregated programming may be an appropriate intervention to make, particularly if it's maybe like an exercise program where there's a factor of modesty involved. I won't get into the other ones on the left here, but I'll just describe what I mean by deep and surface culture. So deep culture is referred to aspects such as thought patterns, value systems, and norms. And the surface culture is things like language, food, and customs. So it's not that one is more important to integrate than the other. It's just that they're separate and they're different. And sometimes doing one is enough. Sometimes doing the other is needed, or sometimes both is needed for a programming to be more culturally competent. I hope I wasn't confusing there. I should have said that I was speaking to the left part. But so the right part here, which also includes cultural factors, but specifically for Indigenous groups. These would include potentially those which are on the left, but also there's also other specific cultural factors which are important to consider specifically for Indigenous groups. And I won't get into all of them now, but they're described in much more detail in the toolkit. But again, like I said, remember that knowing these generalized cultural factors isn't the only part of the process, and cultural groups aren't homogenous. So I've also included a couple tips for inclusivity. So as I said, every community is different, but there are a few things that can kind of be done universally, which would make for a more inclusive organization or programming. These are, again, explained more in the toolkit, but you can see here the majority of what I mean by them. I'll just explain what I mean by literacy level and transportation. So literacy level varies greatly within the province, and it is very important to have plain language communication for when reaching audiences, particularly linguistically and culturally diverse groups. So there's plain language guides which organizations can use, and I've actually included those in the toolkit as well. So you could refer to those, or I'm sure many of you have your own ways of doing that. And also transportation. So lack of transportation is a significant barrier, particularly for ethnically and culturally diverse seniors. And it acts as a barrier for participation in programming and health promotion activities. So it should be prioritized as a key thing to address as part of cultural competency as well. And then finally, after depending on which of the steps you've done, the purpose would be to take what you've learned through the research and the engagement, and to set your specific action goals and the specific activities that are relevant to you and that you will be doing in your community. And this, you could clarify on the individual level what needs to be done, the program level, the organization, and then the level of the community. And then finally, to continue engagement and evaluation and engagement. So evaluate the effectiveness of what you've done, and disseminate these findings or share the information with other CBSS organizations to contribute to a community of practice. So that is sort of an overview of all the steps. And I'm going to leave it at that for now. We recommend that you go to CORE and you go to the multicultural groups, the multicultural group on CORE, and you can download these toolkits and review them and see how they would be relevant to you. So now I'm going to introduce Keiko, and she's just going to talk a little bit about her work with a multicultural organization. So Keiko was the outreach program coordinator this past year at the Japanese-Canadian nonprofit Tonari Gumi, the Japanese Community Volunteers Association. So in this role, she was instrumental in developing and delivering programs for Japanese Canadian seniors living in the suburbs, especially for those who have limited access to available resources. Keiko was also on the board of the Nikkei Seniors Healthcare and Housing Society that operates an assisted living facility and an independent seniors housing in Burnaby. Her involvement in the community led to an interest in ways to bridge the gap between the mainstream Canadian society and ethnic minority communities. So I'll pass it up to Keiko.
Thank you, Mike. So I'd like to share my experience going through some of the steps that's introduced in the toolkit, specifically the cultural audit piece and utilizing that knowledge to develop programs. So in essence, it's about what it's like to put the toolkit in action. So just to tell you about myself, I'm Japanese Canadian, second generation. My parents immigrated from Japan, and I serve Japanese Canadian seniors. And having lived in Japan and worked there, and I grew up in a Japanese household speaking Japanese, I felt that going into developing the program, I thought I have a very high cultural competency. And it turned out that this was a very humbling experience because the Japanese Canadian community is quite diverse, as Mike mentioned earlier, that no one population is homogeneous. So this was originally one project to create programs for Japanese Canadians in the Lower Mainland. Turned out it was actually 3 separate programs for 3 separate groups. So after doing the cultural audit and identifying the key cultural factors, we noticed that one group was mostly second generation Japanese Canadians. They're bilingual in Japanese and English, and they were born and raised in Canada. And the average age of this particular group was in the 80s. We had some participants in the 90s, and one participant turned 100 last year during the program. So their needs are quite different from the rest of the population. And we noticed they loved social programs, getting together, chatting with each other, talking about their experiences during the Second World War, things like that. And that's how we developed the particular program for them. So we had a lot of tea time and a lot of interactive activities. Now, second group we identified are Japanese-speaking residents in a long-term care facility, where they had quite a few of them. And their needs are quite different. It's not necessarily just cultural things, but because these are residents in a long-term care facility, they also had health issues that we needed to take into consideration, or mobility challenges. So that was another factor we had to take into consideration when we developed activities and decided what we were going to do with their Japanese program. Another thing for this group was that the timing of when they came to Canada was important, and where they spend their time when they're younger, because some of the participants had dementia and they might not be able to recall things later in their lives, or maybe after they migrate to Canada as an adult. But we noticed that they were really engaged when we talked about things that are familiar to them, like what they did when they were little and the songs they sang as children. So the third group is another completely different group. And rather than doing social activities, which we tested, we discovered that this group really, really enjoyed educational seminars. This particular group was a group of new immigrants. They immigrated to Canada as an adult. They grew up and were educated in Japan. Their average age, considering there was a big influx of Japanese immigrants in the 70s and 80s, their average age is in their 70s. They're independent. They were interested in staying independent as long as possible. So when we did seminars, especially on health or things like advanced care planning, they were very, very popular. And so that's what we ended up doing. But the cultural audit, we didn't find out about all this information before we got started. What happened was that as we started the program, we tried some activities and checked the attendance and got feedback from the audience and started testing different kinds of details for the program. And after 1 year of running, we started getting a better idea of what each group is interested in, what their needs are, and how to engage them. So in the end, we found out that in creating the culturally relevant activities or finding resources that the group requires, or how to communicate with them and how to reach out to them, was the key to engagement for the program. And to do so, doing some homework was important, but not everything is on the internet. So approaching the group, being part of the group and communicating and having a genuine interest in learning about the individual and the group, what they like, what they prefer, what they need, that I learned was the most important thing in creating this program for Japanese Canadians. So I wish you all the best in connecting with the population you serve. And this is a great journey, and I think it was a very valuable experience for myself and my organization. Back to you, Barb.
Great. Thank you so much, Hyeiko. It's so helpful to hear about the practical application of so many of these different concepts. So really appreciate that. And thank you also, Mike and Daisy, for your presentations. Even though we've been working together for quite a while now, I'm learning something new all the time. So we do have one question here. But before we go to that question, there is another slide that we're going to take a look at just in terms of finding some of these resources on CORE. And you can search by, and by the way, while we're looking at this, if anybody else has questions, please type them into the Q&A box, because we do have 10 minutes for more questions. So looking at the at CORE, you can find additional resources on this topic, and Mike went through a lot of them, but if you're looking for something specific, you can search by keyword in the keyword box on the left-hand side of the screen, or you can use the categories, and that's a drop-down menu, or subject area. So there's a lot of different ways to search. There's also the little magnifying glass icon in the header that you can click on that and then type in keywords there. And as I mentioned, for this webinar, it'll take a couple days to get it up here, but for the webinar and the slides, you can search by the webinar title or just type in webinar and all of our Healthy Aging Core webinars will come up. We'd also encourage you to visit websites of partner organizations such as Mosaic, which has a lot of different material. And so the question that has been asked in the box, I'm going to ask Daisy to answer because it certainly is something that Mosaic provides. And that's, the question is, could you outline what cultural competency training entails? And we know that Mosaic does that. So over to you, Daisy.
Hi, yeah. So for Mosaic, we have a intercultural inclusivity and competency training for all staff member. I think this is like to help us to create this kind of like, I have a personal individual scanning of our like intercultural competency. So sometimes like, when we're working with other cultures, we don't realize that we have some bias, a very deep insight. So is that the training is helping individuals to, just like what Mike have already shared about, it's like we do a scanning to just say know more about like what stereotyping, labeling, generalization. This is very like ingrained inside us, and we don't even realize that we have this kind of like mindset. And so it's a raising awareness of what we are really at. And so when we are serving our multicultural clients, and so we have a more a open mind to build the trust and learning their culture. And so I think this is a big learning for all of us because we have our background, we grew up in different cultures, and we through the intercultural competency training, and we build the fluency to learn how to include everyone in our programming. So based on what they need and the background, and so their life experience is so different. So I think that for Mosaic, we provide organization training for organization to help them to build this intercultural competency. And so there's also leadership and also for the workforce, for the staff member. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dave. We have another question. Are culturally diverse seniors involved in your initiatives on an ongoing basis? For example, in designing the toolkit? I'll take a quick answer. Certainly the Interfaith Intercultural Working Group that's been operating for over a year and a half now does include a number of older adults who are culturally diverse. But the membership is not restricted to older adults or to those who are culturally diverse, but we have members who, for example, are involved in hospice and palliative care groups and bring a perspective of the different cultural norms and values around end-of-life care. We have people representing organizations that are in touch with a lot of different, with diverse seniors and bring the perspectives of what they have learned in their networks and the people that they serve. But I'd invite Daisy or Keiko to add to that if you choose. If you have anything to add to my response? No?
I'll just add, Barb, that when I developing the toolkit, as I mentioned, I developed it through research, but some of the research came from qualitative or discussions with culturally diverse seniors themselves. So, and some of those resources I put into the group. So it comes from focus groups or other types of engagement with culturally diverse seniors. So some of the information from the toolkit is directly from that group. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Next question is, what's the long-term goal for this toolkit? Well, we certainly hope that it will get downloaded and used in organizations, and that we get feedback. We would love to hear from you how you're using it, and the idea of the group area on CORE is to hear how people are using it. And there's certainly other tools. That group area actually started out with Dr. Sharon Cohen's tools for Korean and Punjabi communities around dementia for people with dementia and their caregivers. And so we hope to hear back about the toolkit and the other resources there, so that almost like an informal community of practice can grow out of this group on CORE, where it's a place where people can share how they're using it. They can ask questions, they can provide feedback about what maybe should be added to it. They can provide examples that highlight some of the concepts. So yeah, that's the goal, that it becomes a kind of a live document, and that the group area also becomes a very active community of people, whether they're specifically multicultural organizations or interfaith groups, or organizations that are, perhaps neighborhood houses or multi-service organizations that have a lot of different cultures in the people that they are serving. Another question, with organizations doing some form of programming online right now, is there advice for presenting programs with a culturally sensitive lens? No, Keiko? Oh, Keiko, I know you've got some experience with that. Daisy, you may as well. Keiko?
Yeah, right now we have programs running on Zoom, and we also have a telephone-based program that we partnered up with another nonprofit. In terms of cultural sensitivity, it might not be necessarily culture, but I think there is something to consider when it comes to running programs online, is that there's a digital divide among seniors. And I noticed that some seniors who live with family, they tend to already have the technology to join, whereas some of our participants, they don't have access to the internet or computer, and they felt that they're now left out of the program that they were able to participate in person in the past. And that was something I was conscious about when we embarked on the project in Surrey, that is telephone only. And this meant that nobody was held back in participating in this program, and that was the beauty of it.
Great. Thanks, Keiko. There's two more questions, and just in the interest of time, I'm going to take the next two responses together. One is, will you be adding the discussion about racism, anti-racism, BIPOC recently triggered by George Floyd? In other words, going beyond cultural diversity toward racial equality. And the next one, will you be following up with each agency to see if diversity and inclusion practice is utilized? The discussion, we would encourage organizations to get involved and have those discussions, and certainly the group on CORE is a place to do it. We are not top down. We're not going to be following up with agencies, but we recognize that we take an asset-based approach, and CORE is really all about recognizing the assets that exist in the CBSS sector among volunteers, staff, researchers, etc., and that there is a lot of knowledge, there's a lot of experience, a lot of different perspectives out there, and that CORE is really about that knowledge mobilization and sharing information. So we would encourage you to use the area to have discussions and to share your information, knowledge, and expertise on that. Next question is for Mike, and I see we're already over time, but we will try to answer these questions. But Mike, if you can take the next one about religious holidays and the program calendar.
What's the question?
Sorry. Did you mean to include those? It says holidays in program calendar and communication. Did you mean to include those dates in the programs that we do for increasing cultural competency, or exclude those dates? As far as I know, Canada being an enormously diverse country, one or the other day has a religious event or celebration, and those cultural groups, especially the elderly, say for example, Punjabi celebration, Vaisakhi, are more inclined to the celebrations than participating in the competency programs. Yeah, I think that's referring to something in one of the discussion threads, just sharing resources.
Okay, well, yeah, in the toolkit I mentioned to include religious holidays, just in the sense that, you know, some organizations might, you know, include Christmas and some of the more mainstream holidays into their programming, but not consider the importance of other holidays which are important to the culturally diverse to culturally diverse groups. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Another question, would you be able to speak on how the Cultural Competency Toolkit fits in with the current context of COVID-19 and public health promotion? Is there an opportunity for government bodies to assist with the promotion of this toolkit?
That I'm not sure. I mean, everyone is getting creative in their initiatives during the COVID time. I haven't specifically thought about that for this toolkit, but I'm sure there's space for that somewhere.
Yeah, and certainly we do have many government agencies that are partners with us and are members of CORE, and we work with them often. So we did in today's newsletter, this the toolkit and Group Encore is featured front and center. And so many of the recipients of the newsletter and active members of CORE are with government agencies. And so they can certainly promote it in ways that make sense for their organizations. And then the last question, and probably for you, Daisy, how did you decide which folks to include in this project to begin with?
Yeah, so this is a starting of this open discussion group. And so I invite everyone who are interested to be part of this group to sign up, and also just use the open group area to discuss topics that you're interested. And the working group will get together like regularly to discuss about like collaboration and project and what we can do more to promote intercultural competency, and also to provide multicultural support for our older adults.
Great, thank you. We are over time, and I think we've responded to all of the questions there, but certainly never hesitate to reach out. Use that group on CORE to ask questions and share your information. And thank you again to all of our presenters. We really appreciate it. And thank you all who participated in the webinar this morning. And we look forward to seeing you on CORE. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.